What's a NSFW detail about a historical figure that's normally left out of the history books? Ancient Egyptians believed the god Atum created the universe by masturbating to ejaculation, and that the ebb and flow of the Nile corresponded to how much he came. To honor this, the pharaohs ceremonially masturbated into the river. Probably said here elsewhere, but Victor Hugo, author of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, among other tales, was a notorious philanderer who had affairs on top of affairs with prostitutes throughout his life. When he died, all of the brothels in Paris had closed because so many prostitutes attended his funeral. Big dicks were considered barbaric in ancient history. The Greeks especially thought that it showed men with big rock-hard full-blooded cocks were full of lust and low intelligence. This is why most of their statues today have them displaying a small dick. It's said that Henry VIII exploded in his coffin. Dogs then licked up the Henry juice. Not hidden in his home country, but not known by the rest of the world though, is the fact that H.C. Andersen left a mark in his diary every time he had masturbated, sometimes with a little note on the side, with his thoughts about this session. I'm sorry, but my source is in French. I can translate the beginning. King Louis XIV anal fistula. https://wiki/wiki/fistule_anal_de_louis_ziv tilde. Text equals la %20 fistule %20 anal %20 de %20 louis sur %20 plus yours %20 dizaines %20 d'indigence. The anal fistula of King Louis XIV is one of the many illnesses that King Louis XIV had suffered. It was his surgeon Charles-François Félix which carried the surgery successfully in 1686 after the development of a particular tool and a training on a dozen of indigents. The recovery of the king had a considerable impact in France and in Europe, and gave place to numerous civil and religious ceremonies in the kingdom. Monsieur. The first thing the father of microbiology, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, put under a microscope was semen. They understood that semen was integral to the creation of life but didn't yet understand the concept of single-cell organisms. He fully expected to see tiny little humans in his jizz. So yeah, the first thing he did was whack off on a slide and look at it. Little late but worth a shot. Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell, the poets, had a 30-year letter exchange where Robert, while married, swooned over Elizabeth after he initially met her, declaring his love and want to propose for her all while being married, and her blatant denial and uncomfortable lesbian anguish at this fact. He threatens suicide and lots of self-harm while she's just like, haha, let's read this book together and not think about romance. He was a manic cocaine freak and she was a crazy alcoholic lesbian with a toucan. She drank rubbing alcohol when denied conventional drinks. There's a great play highlighting these events called Dear Elizabeth. French President Félix Faure died while getting his dick sucked. Skeptical smiley face. George Washington had severe hemorrhoids, to the extent that he couldn't even ride a horse into battle sometimes, and had to be pulled on a cart. Lewis and Clark described the screaming shits that they got from eating unfamiliar food, in detail in their journals. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the last German emperor, wrote very sexual letters to his mum when he was a teenager. Princess Diana and her gadget, a sex toy that she carried around with her when she went on diplomatic trips. She had even shown a table of foreign officials her toy as a prank on numerous occasions. She also believed it brought her good luck. One time she forgot to bring it with her and actually asked a bodyguard to go back to the hotel to fetch it for her. Paul Revere would ride from Boston to Newport Read to cheat on his wife. In school I was taught that Ben Franklin had a string of pearls that was several feet long. He would add a pearl to it each time he slept with a new woman. President Grover Cleveland, 49, married Frances Folsom, 21. In the White House, He was basically her godfather and even bought her a baby bed when she was an infant. She knew of him as Uncle Grover as a child and told him she wanted to marry him in the White House one day. https www.vox.com/2015/2/27/8120283/house-of-cards-marriage. America owes its victory in the Revolution partly to a flamingly gay Prussian nobleman with a penchant for polyamory. Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben had served in the Prussian army under Frederick the Great, but was forced out due to his complete lack of discretion about his homosexuality. In Paris he met up with Ben Franklin, who offered to introduce him to Washington at the time. The American forces were getting their asses handed to them by the British and they needed, more than anything, someone with experience in training armies to transform them from a ragged militia into a proper fighting force. They weren't in a position to be picky. Von Steuben, who was blackballed from military service in Europe and increasingly unwelcome in France, took the job. He arrived at Valley Forge in uniform, accompanied by his dog and his 3 French lovers, who also served as his aides-de-camp and translators, and set about training the American army. Because he didn't speak English, his boyfriend, translator Louis de Pontier, would write von Steuben's instructions in French for him, and hand them off to Alexander Hamilton to be translated into English for the men, using a technique where he would personally instruct 10 men and then have each of them go and teach 10 more. Von Steuben more or less single-handedly retrained the entire American army in the latest and greatest of European military techniques. His training manual was in use until the Civil War and still forms the basis of the U.S. military training manual used today. After the Revolution, Congress granted von Steuben U.S. citizenship and a massive estate in New York, where he lived the rest of his life in seclusion with 2 handsome American soldiers who were half his age. William the Bastard's family was torn apart when his 2 youngest sons dumped a chamber pot on the head of his firstborn, leading to rebellions, wars, and eventually his firstborn's lifelong imprisonment. After Alois Alzheimer gave the first ever speech describing the symptoms of what would later become known as Alzheimer's disease, no one in the audience asked him any questions or made any follow-up comments, despite the fact that this was quite literally one of the most important presentations ever given in the field of medicine. For real, Alzheimer's disease affects about 6% of people aged 65 and older. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Alzheimer%27s_disease. It's a big deal. So why did no one pay it much attention? Turns out they were all much more focused on the next guy on the docket, who, allegedly, was there to talk about compulsive masturbation. Abigail Adams apparently spent a lot of time worrying that her son John Quincy Adams would jerk off or bang whores when he left the house, and advised against doing both in several letters to Hi Monsieur.